When the alien forces reached orbit, they looked down to see their enormous fleet casting a shadow across continents. With a mixture of laughter and disdain, observing the cities and fields, Earth wasn't developed enough to pose any threat to them. Its weaponry appeared antiquated in comparison to their enormous arsenal. And its technology was they possessed laser cannons that could destroy entire planets' shields centuries before humans could have imagined, that were resistant to meteors and armor that made them practically unbreakable. Earth's weaponry were no longer than Ian's antiquated antiquities, and as they continued to watch, their laughing increased. Pictures depicting the Earth's defenses, including tanks, jets, and, worst of all, small arms, showed the image of real troops brandishing guns, while wearing some aliens made jokes about their basic clothing that were almost comical. After they had conquered it, some mocked humanity by claiming that they would upgrade their weapons, would be better off giving up than trying to defend themselves with such inconsequential weapons. The command as they readied themselves for the ground invasion, the center was a hive of activity, and the alien warriors were confidently bordering haughty. This was only a conquest mission, a standard practice they had conducted innumerable times throughout the galaxy, and to them, Earth was just another ordinary target, and its inhabitants were these creatures, oblivious to what was ahead. Had battled civilizations with weapons that could bend light and manipulate matter, having overrun empires with defenses that were far more effective than anything Earth could provide in there, though they thought this would end in a few hours or even minutes. They discovered remnants while making last-minute preparations. Radio messages carrying rumors of a lone defender in Earth's military channels were intercepted. In isolated places, the word Gunslinger appeared multiple times with an odd connotation. The aliens dismissed it as myth because they were perplexed by a gunslinger. In times of terror, desperate legend people held fast to the notion that a single person with a pistol they laughed at the ridiculousness of everything that could stand in their advanced army's way. Louder this time, making fun of the stupid stories that people told each other, the aliens sent a squad to land in targeting a rural area they thought would provide little resistance, allowed them to test Earth's defenses. In a small-scale skirmish to get warmed up before the major battle, their commander and an extraterrestrial with damaged skin and a sneer waved to his warriors, indicating the end was near. Humanity's landing ship quickly descended, causing dust clouds to rise as they landed in fields where as the landing craft's doors opened, there was hardly any indication of life. Emerged, their advanced armor shining in the sunlight, and they dispersed, walking around the area alongside the casual. The terrain seemed to be silent and deserted as Hunter stalked his target with confidence. They looked about, hoping to see only terrified peasants or maybe a few strewn about defenders. Their first movements were slow, almost leisurely, as they used antiquated firearms. Looked about, certain that no one could oppose them, but the quiet was almost disturbing. Disturbing since they had anticipated turmoil, resistance, and possibly terrified shouts from people running to escape, but instead there was the alien soldiers looked at one another with an eerie calm. Their first, despite everyone's refusal to publicly acknowledge it. One soldier whispered something about the gunslinger, remembering the human transmissions that were intercepted, but his partner chuckled and dismissed it as just more human imagination. An undercurrent of tension gave way to a glimmer of uncertainty as they moved forward, forming a formation. The leader, attempting to maintain a light environment, joked about people and had weapons ready but held loosely. His laughter reverberated momentarily before fading into the quiet as they played with their tiny toys. In the distance, they saw a human person standing by themselves, but not the one they had envisioned. Instead of running or cringing, he stood firm. He stood nearly motionless, with his hands by his sides, as though he had been waiting for the aliens were so shocked that they froze, not because they were scared. The alien leader appeared incredibly self-assured as he stood alone in front of them, holding only a gun. Smiled, gesturing for his warriors to advance. He didn't have to command them. Knew what to accomplish. This would be an opportunity to demonstrate this gunslinger in a swift victory. The guy remained motionless as the soldiers advanced, demonstrating how outmatched he was. He remained in the same position, staring at them with a level of intensity they hadn't seen before. One alien soldier yelled. The aliens chuckled once more as they ridiculed the human's weapon, referring to it as a relic. For them, hearing voices mixed with the faint sound of wind was a formality. Foreseeable confrontation that would conclude in a matter of seconds, they proceeded with the explicit intention of eliminating this human and any of the remaining defenders. The man suddenly went for his pistol, and in the first shot boomed out as soon as he fired. And the sound pierced the atmosphere. and one of the extraterrestrial soldiers fell. There was a brief gap of shock that the aliens hadn't even registered the event before another soldier, and another shot echoed fell this time. The remaining aliens gazed at the fallen while the laughing died. Unable to comprehend what they were witnessing, one alien soldier raised his weapon to fire while shouting orders, but another soldier was killed by the aliens before he could stop the human's gun from blazing again. We were shocked since they had advanced armor, and this wasn't how it was meant to go. Technology that ought to have protected them from such antiquated weaponry, but instead they were falling one by one to a man brandishing a gun that they disregarded as a toy caused the leader's face to twist in an attempt to rally his troops. He yelled instructions out of shock and rage. But the soldiers paused, their self-assurance was shaken, and the person wasn't running away or even every time he squeezed the trigger. He flinched, and another alien dropped his deadly inaccurate rounds. Underestimated him, and now that they were dealing with the fallout, their haughtiness gave way to dread as they regrouped the aliens. Recognized that the person in front of them was more than just a human, and that this was not the swift victory they had anticipated. The air surrounding them sensed that he was a lethal and uncompromising force with a weapon, tight and agitated, as though the country itself attested to the aliens' foolishness. So certain that they suddenly began to doubt all of their presumptions about the Earth and its defenders, who were still in shock from the first confrontation, got together with a new resolve to defeat this lone human barrier. Their leader is now enraged and ready to heal his injured pride, gave the command to go in a different direction, and the troops cautiously moved forward. Their earlier assurance replaced by an eerie feeling of fear, the jeering and laughter had vanished. And they had become intense. Apprehension over the gunslinger's accurate aim and seemingly unattainable speed as they advanced, but the distant figure stayed motionless despite their numbers. His serene demeanor was unsettling. Instead of facing certain death, this man stood there as though he had already triumphed. Even with their highly developed technology and almost unbreakable armor, the aliens were unable to ignore the growing panic. To infiltrate their thoughts, they had never faced an enemy such as this one before. Who among us could use such a crude weapon with such destructive power? Encouraged by his leader's commands, the next soldier in line advanced, his weapon raised and ready, and he yelled a command in an attempt to scare the human into giving up, but the gunslinger refused to give up with even a single swift. The alien soldier's body slumped to the ground as he raised his gun and shot. Before he had a chance to comprehend what had transpired, his teammates froze. Their heads are racing to figure out how a weapon so basic could so easily get past their advanced defenses. The alien troops were trapped in a deadly rhythm one by one, and every time they moved forward, they were shot. They attempted to counterfire energy bullets with each shot with a fallen soldier, blasts that burned the surrounding air. Yet their target was unharmed. The gunslinger's motions were almost robotic, and every shot found its mark with unwavering precision against the invaders. Were not equipped for this type of conflict. The tactics they had developed against innumerable adversaries were not working for them in this situation. As more of their men arrived, they saw they were up against something much more dangerous than just a human. When the alien leader's anger turned to desperation, he ordered Ed and his soldiers to disperse in the hopes of overpowering the gunslinger from several perspectives. Yet this further demonstrated the futile nature of the gunslinger. There was no hesitancy in his movements as he anticipated their maneuvers and hit them with shots from all angles. Panic started to build in as he faltered, but he was in charge, and the aliens were only obeying his instructions in this lethal dance. Their once perfect formation is now disintegrating into pandemonium amid the ranks. Amidst this chaos, the aliens regretfully realized how dependent they had become on themselves, on their advanced weapons, which they thought would be their best defense. Now stripped of that assurance, they were compelled to face the fact that their technology was insufficient to shield them from the skill, accuracy, and sheer determination of. Despite its simplicity, the leader's weapon was a means of unparalleled destruction in his hands. He became aware of the full extent of his error when his forces began to thin out. His conceit had prevented him from seeing the actual danger in front of them. This was a master, not just a regular person brandishing a pistol. The leader, who had perfected his profession, had his mind racing as he attempted to come up with a plan of action. Plan to thwart the gunslinger's destructive assaults. However, each concept broke down due to the gunslinger lost because he was too quick, too precise, and most unsettlingly, too composed. The once proud war of an unstoppable force. Extraterrestrial troops were now little more than targets, and they were all aware of it, which made them feel less motivated. They had arrived as conquerors, but now they were merely victims of the knowledge that one person could. It was horrible to bring them to this point, yet they could no longer see. He was more than just a barrier, he was a nightmare from which they were unable to flee, a ghost that followed them about at all times during the conflict. Angry at the alien soldiers, who started to tremble and then took a step, they were awkward and uncoordinated as they moved forward, and the dread in their eyes was they were aware that any attempt to go closer would be dealt with deadly precision thanks to their advanced armor. It had previously served as a testament to their superiority, seemed like a cage, keeping them in his field of sight at all times. The sound of their boots clanking on the ground was like a death nail, yet the gunslinger's gaze did not waver. He was blind to the fact that this was a duty to uphold rather than a fight to win. This defender and guardian of his homeland, and these extraterrestrials with all their armaments and conceit had undervalued the power of that belief they believed they could dispel. Earth's defenses with ease, but they hadn't prepared for a man like him. His skill and unwavering resolve unmatched at last, the remaining soldiers started to flee under the gunslinger's unrelenting attack. Couldn't see a way to victory anymore. Every step they took just resulted in additional defeats, and the burden of those losses had become intolerable, and their captain yelled for them to hold their place. But even he could see the fear in their a force beyond their comprehension destroyed their eyes and crushed their spirits. The retreat was chaotic from a great distance. Scream from the triumphant, orderly march they had started. They tripped over one another as they hurried to escape. When the gunslinger's weapons were in their line of sight, they felt as though they had died, weight in their palms, having arrived on Earth with assurance that they dominance. But they withdrew, having been reduced to naught by the gunslinger's unwavering will. They couldn't get rid of the picture of that lone guy standing steadfastly, unfazed by their numbers or weapons. Broke their pride, disregarded their expectations, and revealed a side of humanity they hadn't as the alien forces regrouped farther away. Gunslinger started to understand that physical force and simple statistics would not be sufficient because this one person had destroyed their prior self-confidence and exposed weaknesses in their plan. They initially started to think about using a methodical approach, one that relied on more than only the overwhelming power of their armor, weaponry, and technology. Despite being strong against most adversaries, this man appeared powerless against his ability and accuracy. It wasn't only that he could shoot precisely, it seemed as if he had anticipated every move they would make before they assembled. The directive was sent to their best warriors, who were trained to deal with unforeseen dangers and inform them of their purpose. This group was specifically designed to eliminate the gunslinger by any means necessary. They possessed strategies and weaponry and were trained and skilled in difficult battle situations. Each soldier was a highly adept operator who was confident in their abilities and trained for unpredictable scenarios. Ability to adjust and hit precisely, but when they got ready to proceed, a feeling of dread persisted. They walked cautiously since they couldn't ignore the recent recollection of their colleagues falling so readily. Dividing into smaller groups to approach from various perspectives, each step was planned, and their motions were practiced till they intended to close up on the gunslinger by using the surrounding topography to prevent him from having a clean line of sight. Their edge in an attempt to offset his range advantage, they modified their formation, making sure there are no openings that could expose them as each worker moves purposefully, holding their advanced guns and looking around with a level of seriousness that showed their anxieties. They would not underestimate their objective this time, but as they got closer to the air, it was revealed to be tense and charged with an. Each alien sensed an unseen force, a pressure that increased with proximity. They couldn't identify it when they first arrived at the gunslinger, but they felt as though they were entering a trap that is set not by force but by the very aura of the man who opposed them. Served as an uncomfortable reminder of their preconceived notions of this person's. He was not an ordinary defender. He was an exceptional soldier with flaws in his limitations, kept moving forward with confidence in their new strategy, but they were more conscious of a growing concern about their boss. Encouraged them to continue, reminding them of their goal and training. They refocused, telling themselves that the situation would be different this time, and the gunslinger would have no chance given their numbers and plan. Approach with weapons at the ready, making every motion intentional as they closed in. They aimed and fired after spotting brief movements, only little changes in the shadows where he might be hiding. Energy volleys into those shadows, but each time they concealed nothing. It seemed as though the figure was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere as he slipped between their formations and anticipated their attacks. Relaxed their methodical approach, which had appeared to be so successful only moments before. They had divided up to trap him before things started to fall apart, but instead they discovered one by one. They started to tumble, feeling alone and vulnerable. With every sound and the subsequent collapse of an elite soldier, the gunslinger rounds broke the stillness. Hardly react before another shot was fired, resulting in the loss of another member of their team. Even though they tried to escape him, the gunslinger moved undetected and timed each shot to exploit their weaknesses. Their armor, which was made to withstand the galaxy's most potent weapons, appeared to provide little defense. Panic dispersed among the surviving operators, who attempted to reassemble and signal for assistance, but there was never enough time. Every reaction of the gunslinger's aim was fractioned too late, and the movement felt slow. Was flawless and had perfect timing. It seemed as though he controlled the entire field and dictated their every action, enticing the elite soldiers, who had previously been confident of their victory, were now frantically trying to catch them one by one. Nevertheless, their leader witnessed his troops collapse while observing from a distance and realized the seriousness of their error. He had put them in a position where their tactics, technology, and training were all made ineffective against a single, unyielding adversary. And he realized that this person, this gunslinger, was something they hadn't taken into consideration. His existence and his expertise beyond the leader had dispatched his finest men to confront the enemy, and now they were just casualties. And at last he called for a retreat. It was he made a choice that severely damaged his authority and pride. Yet he was aware that the gunslinger was an adversary they could not overcome with strategy or technology, so they continued this medieval battle. The aliens withdrew their forces because they needed something different in this war. Depleted and their spirits smashed, the remaining soldiers are now acutely aware of the price they paid for their conceit. Regrouped at a distance, they exchanged mute looks, their faces black with defeat. Yet none of them discussed what had transpired, but they were all aware that they had been defeated in a way that was difficult for them to comprehend. Only a defeat in combat, it was a setback to their sense of superiority, which they had misjudged mankind, and in doing so, they had come across an unfathomable force. When they withdrew, their memories of the gunslinger persisted, and they would never forget him or the lesson he had imparted to them. They were unable to match or avoid a reminder that in their pursuit of conquest, they had failed to consider the might and will that stood in their way. The extraterrestrial commanders, watching the failures of their troops, recognized that this human gunslinger posed a unique threat to them. Vanquished entire squads by themselves with an unfathomable level of skill and accuracy now, they were finished with half-actions and haphazard assaults. They assembled their best warriors, who this human was trained, not only for battle but also for situations where superior reflexes and intelligence were crucial. They were resolved that he would not survive the commander-selected warriors, so they decided to give it their all. Has armor that is more durable than what troops typically wear and can survive direct hits from high-caliber weaponry. These men had extensive experience fighting in situations that required a great deal of flexibility and tenacity. They also have specialized weaponry, each of which was meant to. The objective was no longer to simply defeat this in quick, deadly encounters. Gunslinger, but in order to destroy him so completely that he would represent the pointlessness of Earth's defenses, they were physically and psychologically ready, modifying their approach for an adversary who had shown themselves to be everything but typical. The commanders devised a strategy predicated on each elite warrior's relentless precision and swift, overwhelming force. Was instructed to launch an attack using well-planned, erratic patterns that covered every potential escape route they had prepared. Examining each recorded aspect of the gunslinger's movements with great care in order to identify any weaknesses they might discover, that every elite was told to quickly adjust to any change in the human tactics. Were straightforward: strike quickly, adapt continuously. And above all, they were all too close in to give him a chance to counter or breathe. When they were prepared, they moved forward with a focused determination to neutralize and eradicate without hesitation. Each alien knew that the goal of this operation was to restore their honor, and they moved with a unity that showed no uncertainty. It was more than just a goal to make up for their losses and demonstrate their superior strength and discipline. It was a demonstration of their power, and the concept that a single person could fail was unthinkable. Defy them, which strengthened their resolve because they had previously suffered too much from failure, and this time they were intent on winning at all costs as they started to approach to ensure they could resist numerous direct hits. Leaders strengthened their ranks with improved shields, carried weapons made for maximum impact, advanced energy rifles that used movement tracking targeting systems. Their armor was precisely covered with compounds that deflected and absorbed the majority of shots. making each commander lead their forces with a measured confidence that they were almost resistant to conventional firearms. They had at last discovered the ideal plan to defeat the seemingly invincible adversary across. The leaders precisely timed the operation, coordinating every step to keep the gunslinger off. Equilibrium and under continual danger, their approach depended on relentless pressure. When the human was pushed into a corner with no way out, they adjusted their communication through a smooth network, formed immediately with each change in the gunslinger's position. Their cohesion and discipline produced an indestructible wall, and they proceeded with such accuracy that there was no possibility of mistakes or delays. But as they advanced something despite their flawless plan and flawless cooperation, the gunslinger's answer was unexpected. Remained quick and efficient every time they tried to corner him, he countered, defying their expectations. He walked with a sense of alertness that was almost supernatural, waiting for them to do something, as though he had anticipated their strategies. His shots kept finding their targets while eluding their defenses in a frightening accuracy. The commanders realized that despite their adjustments, he was always one step ahead of them. Despite their excellent training, elite warriors started to waver for each well-planned attack the gunslinger had. He slipped through their ranks, turning their own strategy against them each time they believed they had him pinned. The commanders exerted more effort and accelerated their strikes, but this just helped to emphasize the gunslinger's ability. He stayed composed, uncompromising, and concentrated while adjusting to as the conflict continued. The leaders had to confront a disturbing reality as they moved with a precision they couldn't match. Their strategies, sophisticated weapons, and elite training were failing to work against this human. Undervalued his talent and capacity to thwart even their most elaborate schemes. The assurance they had experienced gave way to a growing annoyance as they realized that this gunslinger was more than just a funny. He was in charge of the battlefield, directing their every action and putting them in awkward positions, foreseeing and revealing weaknesses they thought were unattainable despite their best efforts. Their ranks started to dwindle as each elite soldier died. Setback serves as a reminder of humanity's unwavering might and accuracy, and the commanders are now anxious to put an end to this, directed their soldiers to act more aggressively. They forsook caution and concentrated all of their strength on a final full-force attack meant to permanently defeat him, but this only accelerated their loss since they were so desperate that they lost the meticulous synchronization that had originally defined without mercy. The commander's stratagem and the gunslinger took advantage of this collapse. Mercy was formerly the pinnacle of strength and discipline. They discovered that their elite warriors were vulnerable. Technology, all of their elaborate schemes had been overthrown by a single person who used the gunslinger had complete control over the battlefield, even though they had written it off as an outdated weapon. And his relentless counterattacks caused their last onslaught to collapse. Each killed soldier was evidence of the error in their presumptions and hubris, which had made them think they could just defeat Earth's defenders. As the commanders of the last remaining elite forces collapsed, experienced the heartbreaking realization that they were dispersed and defeated. Not by overwhelming numbers or superior technology, but by one person with an unbreakable will, that despite all they threw at him. Gunslinger triumphed and remained unharmed despite their greatest attempts. They suffered the price for underestimating him. As their forces broke, the alien leader's vanity was ultimately crushed, and their conceit and presumptions were deconstructed by an enemy they could never have predicted. He was more than just a person, he was a force to be reckoned with. Emblem of tenacity that they were unable to comprehend and conquer, they withdrew, their spirits crushed in the knowledge. Believed they had come across something incomprehensible, a fortitude and resolve that could not be defeated regardless of how strong their technology or how sophisticated their tactics that alien troops consistently defeated, leaving them with no option but to recognize the extent of their failure. Their once flawless strategies, sophisticated weapons, and powerful elite unit had the humiliation was as complete as it was when they were all reduced to a single human being, a figure they had first ridiculed. Unexpectedly. Shadi. They believed their technological and numerical superiority over Earth would be absolute, crushing any opposition with ease. Yet this human gunslinger had not only vanquished them, but also undermined their self-assurance. Every surviving soldier carried the burden as they regrouped, revealing their fragility in a way they couldn't ignore. Of defeat, the leader of Ears was once assured and proud of their conquest vision, could no longer ignore how seriously they had miscalculated. The cost of this fight had gone beyond mere casualties. It had shattered the basis of their convictions, casting doubt on their idea that Earth's defenses were inadequate and insignificant. each alien realized that they were now up against not only Earth's protector but also a manifestation of resilience that they hadn't taken into consideration. They hadn't simply failed, they had been humbled. The choice to withdraw wasn't their dignity and authority were damaged when they were casually forced to leave Earth and abandon their mission, come with ambitious plans for dominance, and had been made to acknowledge their own limitations. There was no glory in backing down, no honor in acknowledging that one person had resisted them, but to keep going would be suicidal, and every strategy and effort to stop him had been handled with such calm and accuracy that they were unable to defeat it. And they had no other option but to give up as they started to retreat. Each alien soldier moved with the weight of knowing they had misjudged their adversary after seeing the gunslingers. They were still plagued by Shadow, a figure that had remained unwavering and acted as an unstoppable force against whatever they fled, not only from a battleground but also from a reminder of their own limitations after unleashed. Hubris. This loss would serve as a reminder of the perils of underestimating an adversary back home. There was a grim atmosphere aboard their ships, and rumors of this conflict would go throughout their ranks about a lone human, with the alien leaders realized that a weapon they considered insignificant was indestructible against their best soldiers, that their empire, used to victory, would be affected by this defeat in ways that would extend well beyond Earth's orbit. Forced to face the fact that even a tiny planet like Earth might harbor threats they hadn't foreseen, viewed this conquest as a normal goal in their ambitious campaign. But this defeat made them rethink their strategy. When they looked back on the fight, they saw that the gunslinger had done more than just protect, he'd been standing up for something far more profound, and it was now evident that he symbolized not only Earth but an uncompromising determination that went beyond any technological edge. He had exposed the aliens' weakness and exploited it. Their arrogance with a lack of understanding of his weapon, which once ridiculed, it now served as a reminder of their failure, as they realized that technology was unable to make up for it. Because the alien commanders didn't accept the fact that strength needed more than advanced weapons to destroy them, they had undervalued the human spirit and the determination that enabled one person to challenge their practices and presumptions. Withstand insurmountable odds, they had thought that Earth's defenses would collapse as quickly as others did, but this gunslinger had disproved that notion, compelling them to reconsider not just their strategy for conquest, but also the war had taught them to be resilient and strong. But it also shown them that there were forces they couldn't measure. As they left the gunslinger's memory behind, they demonstrated human resolve that transcended reason and technology. Became a symbol among them. He wasn't a threat in the traditional sense, but he stood for an invincible. Gunslinger's deeds would serve as a warning to their empire, because they were a force they were unable to understand or defeat. A reminder that courage and skill might surpass even the most sophisticated types of strength, and that strength could come in many forms. Technology, something they had not anticipated for a warrior who personified the notion that some things that were valuable to defend with all of one's resources, and who knew how to make that defense strong. Now well conscious of their limitations, the aliens departed Earth's orbit in silence that revealed much they had yet to overcome. This world had surpassed them, and the experience would serve as a warning to the rest of their dominion. They had arrived on Earth with the conceit and assumption that they were invincible, only to realize that having power without regard or comprehension could cause them to lose the technology that has allowed them to innumerable triumphs had not been enough to defeat the defense. Who only need skill, conviction, and a tool they had previously written off as archaic as they withdrew into the emptiness of space, the picture of. They would never forget the gunslinger as a representation of Earth's tenacity. He stayed vivid in their memories. This conflict would be remembered as the day they had to face the challenges that would reverberate throughout their ranks. The bounds of their power, despite their vastness and might, their kingdom had been humbled by one person who refused to back down, and refused to give up, since they now understood that Earth was a planet where defenders needed to be careful. Emer came out stronger than any forecast or projection. This was a lesson they would preserve and experience that would influence their interactions and tactics going forward. They would tell stories about the gunslinger was a lone individual who altered their understanding of honor and strength, compelling them to acknowledge the might of an adversary they had before rejected. Their return to their own empire would be characterized by quiet, and in their minds, the gunslinger had evolved from a defender to a legend. A representation of what they arrived laughing and departed in a respectful stillness that they were unable to overcome. Comprehension of the tenacity with which they had faced Earth after a simple conquest was now a location that would go down in their history as the scene of a defeat that changed how they perceived power. They carried with them the enduring recollection of a single person who had defied them during their retreat. 1.